Today we're talking about online organization of genealogy research and records. So one of the first questions is, why should you organize your genealogy records and research in the first place? If your records are not organized, you can likely repeat research you've already done. Very often you'll look over details you didn't see the first time, and you're likely to confuse generations, especially since a lot of times you'll find children named after their grandparents, especially males. So that means that they're not a junior, but they'll have the exact same name. So organizing your records online will help you keep those generations separated. Organizing your records and research as you go will tremendously help you stay on track when researching and save time later if you're looking for something. This will also make it easier when showing information to others. So what types of records do you save and how many copies? Well, a genealogical record is any document or photo that provides proof for events in your ancestors' lives. So those examples would include birth records, marriage, divorce, death records, military, census, photographs, wills, obituaries, newspaper articles, court records, Bible records, correspondence, and various things like that. It's something that showed your ancestor was alive, that they maybe corresponded or they had a relationship with somebody else. You're able to place them somewhere by proof of a record. Excuse me. Since the U.S. population census records are freely available, I usually suggest only saving copies of state or mortality censuses. If you try to print out every census record or save copies of them, it's not going to be quite as easy to go through, because when you save an image of a census record, depending on what the year is, it could be so faded, but you might only be able to blow it up so much that you're still not able to see it clearly. And especially for those early ones that are, say, 1830 census or earlier, a lot of times those pages did not have information at the top of the page. So all you will see are lines, names, and the little dashes. It's not going to give you any information as to where it is, the time period, location, anything like that. So you would have to have a very detailed title just to have that. So again, that's why I suggest only saving digital copies of a state census record, which those will have the typed information on them, or a mortality census or schedule. And those are very specific to certain ancestors. So that means that you won't have a ton of those, you'll only have certain ones. And you should always keep at least 2 digital copies of your records. It's also a good idea to keep the printed copies of your records in your family binder, of course. And sometimes you might even have more digital copies than you would in your family binder, depending on how you've done your binder and your organization method. Mine are typically like that because I do my lineal line in my family binders, where I'll at least have the children listed on the family group sheet, but I don't print out every record pertaining to all of them. Excuse me. But in my digital records, I do have several copies of records that pertain to other family members than just my lineal line. So for your digital copies, it's a good idea to save them to your computer and then also an external hard drive or a flash drive. And in your binder, you may want to limit these copies to only direct ancestors, as I just mentioned. I'm one that I actually have 5 digital copies. I have 2 work computers. I have a home computer, and then an external hard drive at home and an external hard drive at work. So therefore I keep copies on all different devices since I work on all of them, but well, not quite as frequently, but I'd say at least twice a month or so, depending on how much you do on your genealogy research, you need to go through at least your computer and your external hard drive or flash drive and make sure you have the same copies on each. Since you work on your computer, you might save more records to your computer and they don't all get saved to your external hard drive. So periodically you need to go and make sure all the records are backed up. What kind of organizing system should you use? There are many different kinds of organization systems for genealogy records, as we've discussed when it comes to your family binder as well. Your digital organization, you'll create folders for different families and types of records. This has at least been the easiest for me, and I highly recommend it because it helps you be able to know where your records are easily, and it makes the titles not have to be so long since the folder is already giving you a description as well. But remember that you can create as many folders within another folder as you like, which is something I particularly like about the desktop computers versus the Macs. They can be a little bit different. But an example of this was you can have one large folder just titled military records, but then it can contain subfolders for different wars, different types of records, errors, and then you can further distinguish those folders by surname. And I'll show examples of these towards the end. So these are some suggested, or my suggested organization system for digital copies. Typically your main folder will be titled something to the essence of family records or just genealogy. You might have it titled your surname. And then within that, you want at least 2 folders to divide your 2 main lines, your maternal and your paternal line. And then within these, you would kind of branch out further and have your grandparents' surnames. So that way you have 2 folders in each of your maternal and paternal folders. And sometimes, of course, you can have more than these, especially if you have one of those untraditional families and you would like to keep records on an adopted parent, a step parent, anything like that. And so once you have your surname folders, within those you want to create a folder for each category of records that you might have. Not every person or every family will have the same categories. And again, these are those genealogical records that I mentioned earlier. And so within each category of records, you'll have another folder with the family surname or an individual's name. So as you research further generations, you'll add more surnames. You want to title your records with the person's full name and a date. I typically at least do a year, not always a full date since I can take up quite a bit of room. But this will make it easier to know whose records you're looking at without having to blow up and look at every individual image. So these are some examples of the folder system. You can see right here, I've got family records, and these are some of my others that I have, but within family records, this would kind of be the number 1, and then you have your paternal and your maternal folder, and so those are going to be your 2 branches, and then within each of those, you're going to further divide it into each of theirs. And if you're not quite sure how to get started, a good way is to look at your pedigree chart and kind of create the folders based on those surnames. So again, the first column would be you, so you can just name it your surname. And then you're going to have a folder for your father's family, your mother's family, and then you'll divide your father's into 2 more, and etc. These are different examples of topics or types of records that you might have within these surnames. So you see how They have some that are histories, immigration, letters and correspondence, libraries. That could actually be one of those drop folders if you go to archives, library, historical society, and you take several photographs or copies of things. You might have to put it just in a large folder that's just a general one and go through them to divide them up. So that's a good idea to have as a folder sometimes as well. Over here, you can see that some of these are divided, but they could be put under one category. For example, you might have court records. I believe they have that over here somewhere. Yeah, court records. But you think about it, within court records, you're going to have marriage records and land records and possibly military records and things like that. So you have to think about what your definition of that type of record will be. They have birth and baptism put together. I'm one that I separate certain types of records. So I have a category for Bible records and then for birth, marriage, and death. So you have to decide if you want those individual Bible records to be within each different folder, or if you want to keep them in one large folder for that entire family of the Bible records. But this is completely up to you. These are just more examples of different topics you might have. You notice here they have newspapers, passports, naturalization, and photos. Photos is going to be one of those folders that's a bit difficult, since a lot of times you'll have photographs that have multiple people or large groups, and with that you're going to have people from different families. So you do have to make a decision as to which family group that's going to go into. Is it going to go into your maternal side or your paternal side? How are you going to label it exactly? And if you have individual folders for individual people, are you going to put that photograph in every folder? I obviously don't recommend that. A few different ways you could do your photos. You could leave them all in one folder and just have them all named specifically as to maybe who the person is, and when it comes to a group, maybe what the occasion was and a date if you know it. Or you might have a separate folder just for group photos. And so that way you know to go to that folder specifically. So here are some extra things to keep in mind. It's always up to you as to your organization method, so you can choose to add as many or as few folders as you like. But you need to always stay consistent when organizing records. Label them consistently and with the same abbreviations as to not cause confusion. Sometimes if you're saving records into a large folder and going to sort them later, you might have short abbreviations like obit instead of obituary, HS or GS, headstone, gravestone, MAR for marriage records, DC, death certificate, and so forth. So just make sure you're consistent with those abbreviations. The more you follow your organization system, the more familiar you will become with it, and it will be easier for you to find those records. And it's never a bad idea to go back periodically, review your folders, and double check that your records are in the correct folder and properly titled. This is something I try to do more frequently than even backing up some of my records, because that way I know at least in one location they are all in the correct folders, they're all named properly, and then I'll make sure to have that copy backed up to everything. And again, there'll be some records that you may want to keep a copy of more than one folder, but this is up to you. An example of a record might be a marriage record. So it's for more than one person and has information on more than one family. So many vital records are the same. They contain information on more than one person or surname. And sometimes this can cause confusion, so you'll have to see what works best for you. Marriage records are one of those very tricky ones. You have to decide which family you're going to have that put in. And again, periodically back up your copies. You may want to create a folder system on your computer even before you have started to do too much research. And this way you'll be familiar with what types of records you might want to save. So it'll never hurt to have a folder for a certain type of record and it be empty for a while, because it might take some time to locate that specific type of record. Maybe you know of an ancestor and you have heard or you've seen a reference to their obituary, but you've just not been able to locate it yet. So creating a folder for obituaries is good to help you remember that's something you need to continue to look for. The same goes for maybe war records, death certificates, and birth certificates. Those might be things that you have to get an original copy for, and you're not able to find it online. So organizing your genealogy records online will always be a work in progress, and it's solely up to you as to how much you record and when to stop. It's kind of the same basis for your family tree. This part is up to you. Having your records and photos backed up to your computer and your flash drive makes sharing your records much easier. So if you just simply want to show the records or photographs to family members, you have them digitally. And it's wonderful because you don't need the internet to access these. And this is when you have them saved just to your computer, not to a specific software system or website, or within different email folder systems. So that's one thing. My family, or my mother's family, they live very far south in the country where there's very poor signal and hardly any internet or Wi-Fi. So I like to keep my photographs, my documents in folders on my computer so that if I go home and I actually find some family who are interested to see what I'm working on, I can show them even if we don't have any internet at all. And they're all on the same, and the folders are supposed to be, so I can locate them easily. I've kind of gone over this already, but you can pause the screen if you want to maybe write down how this system works. So your first folder, it could be family records, genealogy, your surname, and then you want to break it up into maternal and paternal. And you want to have the surnames for your maternal grandparents within this folder. So an example, I have Glenn and Wingate. And then you begin to add your folders for the types of records, which I have below. And so for my paternal folder, I have their names, which are Rosen and Litch. And then I have subfolders of birth records, marriage, death, military, newspaper articles, obituaries, wills, deeds, headstones, immigration records, land records, family or personal histories, court or probate records, personal correspondence, church records, photographs. And again, this can contain all of your ancestors, or it can be broken down various ways, individuals, surnames, generation. That part's really going to be depending on what photographs you have, who is in them, and how much information you know about the photograph. And then you might have other folders that pertain to records for your ancestors that might be different. These are some other options for having your digital copies backed up. These are all computer programs, however. So you can use Roots Magic, Family Tree Maker, Ancestry, MyHeritage, Google Drive, Evernote. And so these examples right here are actually for Google Drive, which I know with several updates and Google accounts, that's something that's becoming very popular because it's very easy to share. You can access it on almost any computer or device. Just remember that a lot of times if you're trying to access it, you do need internet availability. So you can create folders in Google Drive. You can have them name various things. You can have your downloaded images and records. You can invite people also to view your folders. So that's another reason a lot of people have gone to using Google Drive. These are, excuse me, some other organization techniques. So for example, imagine if this were your family binder and you have, each of the surnames right here. You can go on to organizing it by having your surnames, and then you slowly start digitizing the records you have within each one of these, and you already know what folder to put them in. You might break it up a little bit more as you go, however. These are some examples of roots magic. So this is what a family tree would kind of look at. It is nice because it separates each generation by a different color, which that can always be helpful. This is just an example of basically the profile view. A large difference in roots magic and ancestry and things are you put in the information, put in the information over here, and it will help generate a timeline, which is a little bit more specific than the timelines you might see on Ancestry and other sites. In order to save your records, this is an example of how to save records from Ancestry. The same actually applies for Family Search, MyHeritage, Heritage Quest, and other sites where you would find these. So this is an example of just a census record. So typically you would save it. You can save it directly to your computer. And so here's an example of one that is already saved, and it's telling you who it's saved to in your tree, but then you can save it to your computer as well. You can also click the little tools icon over here, and then just click download, and it will download the image to your computer as well. When it comes to Mac and Apple computers, the filing system is going to be a bit different. But if you notice up here in the Media tab, this is where you can upload all of your various photographs, which your digital copies are technically going to be photographs for the most part. You might have several PDFs of information, Word documents, but a lot of the copies are going to be images. So that's why for Mac system, a lot of it will be in a media folder. And again, you can pause the site to look these up. These are some websites on how to switch from Family Tree Maker to Mac Family Tree and import your family tree. 3 simple rules for managing your digital genealogy documents. How to name sources in Roots Magic 7, and then how to use Evernote for genealogy. And Evernote has been becoming increasingly popular as well. You do need to, it's going to work differently depending on what type of computer you have and what type of system you have, so keep that in mind. But there are a ton of various YouTube videos to help you learn which way goes with that. And then also, I already did. So now I'm going to show some examples of my filing system. So as you can see, I've got my main folder, which is Family Records. And within it, I do have more than just my maternal and paternal. So over here, the first one I kind of have is the colorized photos. This is one of those, as I talked about, that you might have a large folder for when you have many records that are different and you just need to have them in one location until you're able to sort them. This is, I believe, over 200 photographs that I was able to colorize using MyHeritage, and I've just not sorted all of them into the family groups yet. And then I have a folder for DNA. Ancestry just did all of their new updates on the DNA. And so whenever Ancestry or 23andMe or MyHeritage does their updates, I always like to do screenshots of the previous, results and then the new results. So I keep up with those. And then I have one for Fraser, which this is my stepfather's family. I have one for my husband's family. And then I have other, which a lot of these are photographs of kind of allied families. So they don't belong specifically in one of these. So we're going to look at my maternal side and then my mother's maternal. So here, I'm going to go through several of these, but you notice the types that I have are Bible, birth certificates, and you notice I just have it kind of abbreviated. DAR for DAR applications, death certificates, deeds and indentures, family histories, family trees, headstones, marriage certificates, military obits, photos, and wills. So when it comes to Bible records, I typically keep folders with each of the family Bibles. So you see I have Barton, which these are all the pages from the Barton Bible. Carter, McKinney, because these are actually two different families. I have the Glenn Bible, Joyner Bible, and then this one is specific to a couple and their children. It's not exactly, because it has each of their parents as well. So it was this couple's Bible. And then this is simply a page from Ancestors Bible, the John Adams Bible, and it has the transcription at the bottom. So I only have one page of that. That's why I've not put it in a specific folder. When it comes to birth certificates, I do have this, which is one of those Bible records. This listed all 15 children and had all of their birth dates here, which that was, none of those had birth certificates, so I do keep this one in my birth certificate folder just because that's information that I truly needed at one point. And then I have the birth certificate for my grandmother. And so I don't have many birth certificates, but that is because most of my mother's family lived in the country, were born before they recorded or even after, and they didn't always get a birth certificate. Now, when it comes to death certificates, I do have quite a few. So you notice that I have the various surnames here. So I have Barton, Glenn, Joyner, Rackley. And this main folder I have is Glenn Joyner, which were my great-grandparents, and those were their two surnames. And Barton was one of their mothers, and again, Rackley was another one. So I could probably have several different ones, but within these folders, the death certificates are going to correspond to that name. And then I have deeds and indentures. So right here, this is an indenture for my fifth great-grandfather, I believe, Asa Joyner, from 1854. And then I have a deed from Elizabeth Lanier White from 1897. So I've put in here, and I know I don't have indenture on this one, but I know that's what it is. And then I have a deed record. So you notice each of these are only images. If I blow up the image, it's not going to tell me specifically what type of record this is, what book it came from. And that's kind of okay because, you know, these are just folder system. This doesn't have a place for me to cite every record. But I also use Ancestry enough that if I go to Ancestry and I look up this individual and I know the date of the record, I have these records on Ancestry with the citation. For family histories, these are pages that I have copied from family history books or written documents on specifics, so they'd be profiles of ancestors. And you see some of these are obviously my copies that I've highlighted quite a bit. Family trees, these are actually records I've gotten from someone else. And the reason I have these copied are it's a different line, so we do share common ancestors, but not all of the family. But they have written several notes, and this was an individual who would technically be about 2 generations further back than me. So they had firsthand knowledge of some of this information. Now, headstones. This is something, once again, that is similar to photographs, so you have to figure out how exactly you're going to divide these up. So, for example, I have Anderson. This is Joseph Anderson, and I always put the birth and death year if I know them. And even though this is Vicey Roddenberry, she was his daughter, and she's one of the few that we actually have a photograph of her headstone. When it comes to Carter, so you notice, even though this one I can see the name and the dates easily, this is a headstone that you cannot read unless you blow it up. And the same almost for her husband. So I make sure to put the name and the dates. Trying to see which one I might have, probably this one. So yeah, I have 40 different images here for headstones. And so for these, for example, right here, there's some that I might have more than one image of the headstones. So I'll usually put, you know, a number 2, so that various numbers, so that I know that they're all the same person. So right here is another, I believe, 5th great grandmother, Tabitha Cobb Glenn. So I have her year, and then I have all of these that are individual photographs, because her grave, it was actually handwritten on there, but it was in several different sections. And then sometimes I'll have photographs of a cemetery plot, so it has more than one grave. And so for these, I try to put in order who is there. So for example, down here I have Joseph E. Glenn and Mary Ella Barton, and I try to keep the women's surname in here. J.W. and Missouri Adams Glenn, this would be James Washington. So sometimes if it's a very lengthy name, I don't always include it, but if it's a specific headstone of just one, I do try to record the name as it appears on the headstone. This is another folder that I have even more. Right here you can tell that this is not a photograph that I took myself, but this is the only image I have of the Asa Joyner's headstone. So right here it says Grave of Asa Joyner, Evergreen Church Cemetery. I have actually gone to try to find his headstone, but the cemetery, so to speak, was not really a cemetery like you might think. It is, there are graves just scattered in the woods. So you have to know specifically where that is in order to be able to find it. So that's why I have taken these. These are pictures I took from a book that I have in my folder. Now, nearly all of the other photographs I have taken the pictures of myself. Again, I do have some of these that are contemporary of the time of Asa Joyner, just because I've never been able to find these headstones myself. So if I am able to, I will know what they look like. So you can see various ones like that. And also, one thing that I have begun doing, if you notice right here, I have Priscilla Collins Joyner. This would be my 3rd great grandmother. I always like to take a picture of the headstone as it is, and then if it is broken, but it's something that can be picked up, I'll try to get the full headstone. But the reason I will take a photograph of it as is so that when I go back next time, or in case someone else is looking for it, they'll know that this is the condition that it is in. So now I'm going to go to marriage certificates, and excuse me. For these, a lot of these are marriage certificates that have not been digitized. They are not online. I've had to go to the courthouse myself and take photographs of them. So you'll notice some, you can see the page is kind of tilted a good bit. Several of these actually. So for marriage records, I try to put the groom and bride's name and the year that the marriage took place. The reason I don't put the specific date is, as you know, several marriage records are going to have two different dates on them for when they applied for the marriage and when the marriage was official. And the same goes for my joiner family. And I have a photograph of which book in the courthouse it came from, because all of these records I had to get myself. None of these were available online. Now, military, this is one of those that can be interesting. So for military, once I go into here, I do surnames. So for example, I have Anderson, and I have Civil War, Revolutionary War, but my Civil War folder is empty. And that's because I've actually not come across an Anderson descendant that was an Anderson with Civil War. But for Revolutionary War, I do have his pension application, so I have both pages of that. When I go to Glenn, you see I have Civil War, Revolutionary War, World War I and II. As far as the Revolutionary War goes, I don't have the actual pension application yet. I only have references to it. So that's something I'm still looking for. And here you can see that once you open Civil War, I have the name of the ancestor, but I also have widow's pension. So this is actually a record of his wife who applied for a pension application for his military service. So again, these are various folders, and they're here due to what I have. Sometimes I will put the other folders just so that I know what I'm looking for in the future. Now, these are obituaries. So I always try to put the name of the individual and the year of their death, since these are obituaries. Sometimes here, you notice it just says dead at 65. So I'll make sure to put the full date so that you kind of know when that happened. So these are some examples of photographs I have, and I try to keep names on all of these. I try to keep them in order of who they are. So if it's a family like this, I have Charlie Black Joyner family. And again, these are all large group families, so I kind of just simply have them named Glenn Joyner Family Records, because I know that it was an event, but I could not name every person in there. And some of these are a few duplicates. So this is my second great-grandparents. There's my great uncle and one of his college photos. So I have individual photos, I have yearbook photos in here, group photos. You can see some are more recent, some have been colored. And so I just try to go down and I try to keep, I don't have dates on all of these because many of them I don't know the specific date that the photograph was taken. And then I have last will and testaments. So here I have Jeremiah Glenn will abstract. So this record, and hopefully this is pulling up, is just a reference to the record of his will. So it just names who is listed in it. It has quotes as to my daughter Nancy Wood's heirs, who the executors are, and the witnesses. So that's basically giving the basics of the information, and it does tell you what will book it is in and what page number. So then I went and I found the book online, which was not indexed, and I believe it said which page number, but I had to go through and find the original. So this is his original last will and testament. And if I go to my other line, you can see that I have several of the same folders, but I do also have some folders that are different. For example, this is one that's labeled Wingate Book. There was a book published on the family, so I have images of that taken. Also have stories, which it's only one at the moment, but this was one of the stories that was published in the Huxford books. And I also have quite a few correspondence for this side of my family versus the other side. So these are several letters that were written, and I have notes from them, and I typically put who it was from and who wrote it. So I have all of these records that are letters written back and forth. Court records. So that's my Gibson West orphan record. And of course, you've already seen those types. So that is my organization system. When it comes to others, I might not have as many types of records, so I don't have all the families laid out quite the same. So you're going to have to see what works for you, and if it helps to write out the types of folders, types of records you have to begin with, that's perfectly fine. You can always add to these, you can take them away, you can merge them. And I love the fact that you can make subfolders within folders and so forth. So that way it just really helps you know where your records go and makes that filing system and organization much easier. So if you have your own online organization system that's very different from mine, please post in the comments and let me know how yours is different. I'd love to learn some new ways. And if you have any other questions, just please post them in the comments, and you can also email me.